You're listening to Chicago Stories, a podcast from City Hall featuring the stories of everyday Chicagoans, as told to Mayor Rahm Emanuel.
Mayor Rahm Emanuel, Chicago Stories. We're here with Ivo Daalder, the head of Chicago's Council on Global Affairs. So have you noticed that since you left NATO, the world's falling apart?
You know, I did, actually.
Do you think it's a cause effect, or do you think...
I do. You know, before I got there in 2008, Russia invaded Georgia. I got there in 2009. I left in 2013. They invaded Ukraine in 2014. So, yeah, I think it's...
direct relationship. You held it together.
And the whole thing just fell apart.
And these are serious subjects. I wanted to actually, originally, when we talked about it, is have you, Ivo, in to talk about cities, global cities, what the council's doing on global affairs. But given Iran, North Korea, Syria, I think it's only, we'll talk about global cities at another time if they're still around after this.
Exactly.
This going on. So if you were prepping the president now for Korea, I get a lot of questions like, what would you tell the president? So how do you think the president should prepare for Korea? How do you think the president should think, or his team, for what he did in Iran, with Iran on the nuclear deal vis-a-vis Korea? And what do you think this means then to the world, which is kind of more of an open-ended question?
So let me take North Korea first, and sort of what I think the fundamental question to which we don't know the answer is how serious is Kim Jong-un about getting rid of his nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. He says he's in favor of denuclearization. The North Koreans have been saying for 25 years.
Which means anybody can interpret that any way.
Exactly. They've been saying this for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And the key here is to say, how serious are you? What are you willing to do to give up your nuclear weapons? And what price are you asking me to pay? Mm-hmm. I think it's the only thing that matters. For the rest, nothing else matters in this meeting. And as president, sitting down there, every which way you need to ask him, how are we going to get it? Are you willing to allow inspectors in? Can Americans come in? Are you willing to give up the weapons that you have tested? Are you willing to give up your long-range missiles, your short-range missiles, your medium-range missiles? Are you willing to give up your production facilities? Are you willing to have 100% verification?
It's a long laundry list.
It's a long laundry
list. Which means there's actually opportunities for, rather than being a problem, that list gives you a lot to work with.
So if we go in with an all-or-nothing approach, it's either everything or nothing. We know what the answer is going to be. Mm-hmm. Certainly in the first round, it's going to be nothing. But let's probe how serious is he. There's two reasons he's coming to the table. One is he probably saw us putting on the economic pressure. He saw us putting on the military pressure. The president is known for speaking his mind. Talked about fire and fury, locked and loaded, rocket man. We're going to destroy you. And that's, I think, one of the reasons Kim is coming to the table. But the other one is he's got nuclear weapons. Mm-hmm. He's got nuclear weapons that may even reach the United States.
He proved his point. And in return for which he's coming as a nuclear power who's just met twice with the Chinese president, who he'd never met before, and now he's going to meet with the president of the United States as an equal. He's achieved a lot in just 3 months. So we don't know where this is going to end. I don't think it's going to end on June 12th with an agreement to denuclearize in a month. I think it's a long process, but that's number one. So do you think, I don't mean to get you off that, but rather cut you off, do you think that the bare minimum comes out of there, here's the next meeting and here are the two people that meet? I hope so. My fear is that somebody just gets up and storms out and says, let's go to war. What you want is the beginning of a process that then gets done by serious people who, not that the presidents and the chairman aren't serious. I mean, people who know the details. For a second, I was hoping that you said that, but okay, go ahead. Who know the details. Right. That goes to the professionals. Right. This is going to take a long time to get right, and we're much better off, as Churchill said, to jaw than to war. Mm-hmm. So that's what you hope to get out of the meeting. I think the president is setting expectations extraordinarily high. He said this morning, when he met with the three hostages, that the proudest achievement of his presidency will be when, not if, the Korean Peninsula is denuclearized. That's a high bar. What do you think the Chinese are thinking right now, given that they didn't have a meeting with what they didn't really pay attention to the president? Now, I'm not talking about our president, President of North Korea. All of a sudden now they have two meetings. They're not invited to what's going on in Singapore. They, like
Japan and like South Korea, slightly less South Korea, are on the outside looking through the frost window trying to figure out what the two are saying to each other?
They're afraid. They're afraid that the North Koreans and the Americans will make a deal that leave them on the outside, and particularly a deal that will weaken North Korea, strengthen South Korea, and keep the Americans on the peninsula. Frankly, the Japanese are afraid of exactly the opposite. They're afraid that Trump will make a deal in which his security interests, primarily long-range nuclear weapons that can hit the United States, are taken care of.
And
but
everything immediate.
Everything else stays around, and we withdraw troops at the same time, which is what the South Koreans are worried about. So everybody is worried about it. Nobody quite knows how these guys are going to talk to each other, and they're pretty unpredictable fellows, so we don't really know what's going to come out of the meeting.
You still haven't answered the question. What do you say to a guy that doesn't read memos?
Well, that's very hard, and not only not memos. It's the question. You know, he may not know the bullet, but what's behind the bullet point? Right. So that's why I said there's only one thing you need to find out: how serious is the guy about denuclearization, and the rest doesn't matter because that's the answer you want to get.
How did you get interested in foreign affairs?
So I was born and raised in the Netherlands. Right. My parents went through World War II. My father through 5 years of occupation. My mother, who was Jewish, escaped to Switzerland. And
she goes where? To what city?
To Geneva.
Oh, okay.
With her, she was 14 years old with her mother and older sister.
In
1942.
Huh.
Late 42.
That's amazing.
So it was very late. Took them 6 months to get there. It's a pretty harrowing story, and she lost much of the rest of her family, but the three of them got out. So this was part of my dinner conversation when I grew up, and I came away with that as saying there's one country that really matters, and that was the United States because it liberated the Netherlands. And I need to understand how we make sure that wars like this never happen again. That's how I got into this. It's about personal experience, one form or another. My parents met in 1948 at the Congress of Europe, which was called in order to create a United States of Europe, because that's what Winston Churchill wanted. And the European project was as important to them as people and as a couple as anything. And so this European project, the strong transatlantic relations, being an ambassador to NATO, having lived half my life in Europe and half my life in the United States, is sort of a life's vocation. So it's who I am, in addition to what I'm interested in.
We just did what we did in Iran. What do you think that, best as you can tell, what are the Chinese, the North Koreans, more importantly the North Koreans? I've read everything I could read on this. I still don't. That's all.
It's very hard to get insight to what the North Koreans can. So it's all supposition. But one supposition is, the message that the president sent is that when you sign an agreement with one American president, the next American president can get rid of it. And the North Koreans already know this. They signed the agreed framework with the Clinton administration in 1994. Question of how much they implemented it, but they were there, and the Bush administration threw it out. By the way, John Bolton, same guy, who's now the National Security Advisor, was behind getting rid of both the Iran agreement just now and, of course, the agreed framework agreement in 2001. So one lesson is you can't trust the United States, and that means you're not going to have a deal. The administration says, no, that's not the lesson. The real lesson is that we only want real deals. Not these weak deals that President Obama was satisfied with. We want real deals. I'm not sure that either the North Koreans or the Chinese read it that way. I think they read it as Trump is doing his own thing, and it's not clear you can trust him.
Well, that makes it pretty difficult.
Yeah, this is not a good sign.
No.
If you are serious about denuclearization, then you need to and you are serious about diplomacy and negotiations and agreements, then it is very important, and when you become a new president, you adhere to the agreements from the past. This administration is not a very good example of that.
Where do you think all of the Europeans are left? Mainly, I don't mean to say all the Europeans, but presumably England, France, Germany, who's kind of drafted alongside us, sometimes been alongside us, etc. Where do you think they are right now, given, I mean, how do they, what would you, if you've been in Europe long enough, I mean,
This is absolutely devastating. Remember what the president did. In January, he said, I don't like this Iran deal. We need to fix it. We need to get a better deal. Yeah. And I know the Iranians won't do it, and the Chinese won't do it, and the Russians won't do it, but you, the Europeans, the Brits, the French, and the Germans, you need to fix it. And they spent the next 4 months negotiating in excruciating detail to improve the agreement. And they were very, very, very close. By last Friday, Pompeo, it has been reported, the Secretary of State said to the President, give me 2 more weeks and I think we can get this done. And he walks away. And he says, not good enough. So the Europeans have now learned whether you flatter him or whether you do a business-like approach, whether you say no mas or whether you engage in negotiations, the result is always the same. He walked out of Paris, he walked out of TPP, he walked out of the Iran agreement, and basically the lesson is that allies don't count in Washington. They don't matter anymore. And if that's what you think when you're in London or Berlin or in Paris, you say, okay, if we don't count on Washington, then why should we listen to what Washington wants? Why don't we figure out a way to either get closer to the Russians or get closer together?
But you agree that that's never been European capital's strong suit?
Listening to Washington?
No, just going solo, independent.
No, and it's
that they're somewhat in a...
they're in a bind.
Right.
How much, they want America to lead.
Right.
Here's the French president. The French president of all people. The country that gave Gaullism, which is independence from the United States. I think that's the French version. The French president
there was a more street-like term, but yes.
And he comes to the joint session of Congress and tells them, you have to lead. We've never heard anything like that from a French president. So yes, they want the United States to lead. But they're also saying, I'm not sure we can do business with this guy, and they're going to wait him out. The question is,
what happens to the war?
What happens in the meantime?
I do think, they're in a fix. I got to believe sometimes the Russians, the Chinese must be popping champagne every day.
Every day.
Trump is, the unpredictability, the lack of kind of respect for what the allies and partnership means, that this is serving their interests at one level.
Absolutely. So the United States has one advantage. We're military and economically powerful. But the real advantage we have over China and Russia, we have allies. They have clients. It's a big difference. And our allies are the richest, most militarily capable countries in the world. And we've just told the allies in the last 12 months, actually, we don't really care about you. So the Chinese and the Russians are saying, we care about you. We'll work with you. So Russia has become very influential in the Middle East, where the United States has also pulled back. Started under Obama, but it has continued under Trump. And in much of the rest of the world, the Chinese are filling in. At the UN, I talked to a UN diplomat. He says every time the United States says we won't pay anymore, the Chinese say we will. They now have more Chinese diplomats than any other country at the United Nations. They're in Africa, where they're buying up resources and building infrastructure. They're doing the same in Latin America. They're doing the same in Eastern Europe. They have a whole infrastructure project that they're doing in Eastern Europe, giving them the money and creating ties that are not allied ties, they're mercantile ties. They are buying the countries. And our influence is being reduced. We have a huge competition with China, economically, politically, militarily, and we're telling our allies, actually, we don't need you to be part of that competition. I don't think it adds up, but that's where we are. We were just talking before we started here. This president, in my view, got handed peace and prosperity, and it's hard to say in the shadows of a 3.9% unemployment that he's making a mess of the prosperity part. Although I think on the trade wars, he's definitely got the match next to the gasoline. The second thing is, but on the peace part, when you look at the trade deal in Asia, you look at NAFTA, you look at what he just did on the Iran nuclear deal, he is making a mess of the peace piece of this deal. Absolutely.
I'm not saying everything was perfect.
No.
That said, this is
a new order. For basically since FDR, the United States has said we need to lead internationally. We need to be out there and help our allies and work and have security alliances and open up trading routes and to promote democracy and human rights. And we had Democrats and Republicans who disagreed about tactics, but we never disagreed about strategy.
Or the premise.
And the fundamental premise.
Yeah.
This guy actually thinks that American leadership is part of the problem, not part of the solution. He doesn't believe in leading, he believes in winning. Winning defined as I kept my campaign promise, therefore I win. I said I was going to move the embassy to Jerusalem. I'm moving the embassy. I win. I told you I was getting out of the Iran agreement. I'm getting out of the Iran agreement. I win. But what's the strategy? What are you trying to achieve other than keeping a campaign promise? It's not only that it doesn't have a plan B. What's plan A? Mm-hmm. What are we trying to achieve? And where are we in terms of building strong alliances, opening up free trade, and promoting democracy and human rights? Democrats and Republicans have been doing this for 70 years. And now we're asking the question, maybe that's no longer our role.
Let me ask you a question. Well, at least he's asking stuff. I struggle with this. Do you think 4 or 8 years, whatever it is, we can ever reclaim that position, or it's permanently damaged?
So I'm struck by the fact, we were just talking about the Europeans, how much they are hunkering for American leadership. I'm struck by the 40-year-old French president coming to Congress and saying, we want you, we need you to lead.
Right.
And that suggests to me that it's not yet completely broken. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can do 8 years.
I know that.
I think that's too long. Mm-hmm. Then people are going to say there is an alternative. We need to find some other way to do it, whether that's getting closer to China or building up their own capabilities or finding some other way. I was in Japan not that long ago, and a very senior diplomat said, Abe, I think he can keep together the liberal democratic order in Southeast Asia for another 3 years, but the throne is empty. And it can't be empty for that long. And I think that's probably right. If Donald Trump gets reelected and pursues these foreign policies, then it's going to be very difficult to come back to where we used to be.
It is amazing because I've done a lot of reading in the last couple of years on Vietnam after we visited it. When you think of the trajectory where out of Vietnam, we all thought our prestige was going to be gone post the Cold War we lost, that this was going to be a domino theory. The domino that happened was liberal democracy, liberal capitalist democracy. We look where Korea was, look at it where it is today. Vietnam where it was, look at where it is today. You go through the other parts of Southeast Asia, etc. It's an amazing story of actually our basic economic and political structures.
Absolutely.
One way or another adopted. It was a domino theory, it's just we read it wrong.
Actually, to the extent that Vietnam, it was a negative influence on that. But yes, we have been involved in Asia for a very long time. We're the security guarantor of the region. We are involved with our military. We're involved economically. And it's that retreat, not being part of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, that 12-nation agreement that is going to set all the rules for trade in the Asia-Pacific, talking about withdrawing troops from Korea. Talking about, as he did to the campaign, he hasn't done it since, about the possibility of South Korea or Japan acquiring nuclear weapons. These are not the kinds of ways in which you maintain that democratization, the growing capitalism, the growing free market enterprise system.
Ivo, my thing is people could handle some change. I think this is way too much for the system. I mean, when you think about both NAFTA, TPP, just what he did in Iran, what's happening. I mean, I can't. What I think the president's doing is crazy. That said, I actually do wish him well in Singapore.
Oh, absolutely.
I think
we are all much better off if they can start a process of having talks about getting rid of nuclear weapons or reducing them or limiting them in a way that makes the world a better place.
Can I say one thing? As this is both the son of, I think, a successful pediatrician, having my own son. I read everything about the North Korean president as how he's mimicking either his father or his grandfather. My understanding of people that have been the children of other successful leaders isn't that they try to mimic, but they try to one-up. And what I've never seen in the analysis of North Korea is how, if you were the present president, how you would actually one-up your dad or your grandfather so you, at your age, cement your place in history. And I don't know what one-up to him means.
Right.
Because it's not just to mimic. Everything I've read is about how he's mimicking what happened in 2003, what happened in 2000, I've never seen a son in political life, I can't speak of other professions, try to actually match their father. I've seen them try to best the father.
And in some ways...
So what would be if you were trying to do this is what I was trying to say. Part of the briefings, we both have been there for a president. It's here are your talking points, here's your achievables, and here's the psychology of the person. And I know we don't know him very well, but how would you prep him for the psychology? Because I don't know of a son that, as I said, sons in politics usually try to best their father. Sometimes it turns out, as we know in other situations here domestically, not really a good situation.
Right. So I think there's two, and this is why figuring out what he's really about. There's two ways in which he can best both his father and his grandfather. One is he has acquired the capacity to launch a nuclear weapon against the United States. His father didn't do that. His grandfather didn't do that. He hasn't. And that has not only given him power and survivability, it's given him the power to tell Xi Jinping, I'm going to come and meet you, and the door is open. And it's given him the power to say, I want to meet with the President of the United States, and the President of the United States said yes. No other president has ever done that. So that's one way in which he's besting his father.
The preconditions.
Without any having to give anything up. That's the bad part. The good part could be, I'm going to use this power to achieve something my father never achieved. I'm going to get peace on the Korean Peninsula. I'm going to provide development for my people so that they can actually eat and develop and become socially prosperous. And I'm using the power that I've gained on the nuclear side to achieve that on the political and on the economic side. Let's hope that's what he's all about. Hard to see, given his background, that's what he really is about. But stranger things have happened. Germany, when you were living in 1980s in Europe, you didn't think Germany was going to be unified, and yet by 1991 it was a unified country. You didn't think that the Berlin Wall was going to come down, and yet it came down. So things like that can happen, and they do happen. History has ways of moving forward. But if the psychology is driving it, my sense is he believes that he has achieved something his father never did, which is he met with the President of the United States. That's a pretty darn good achievement.
Well, I think as you look at this, and having briefed two presidents, I just think you look at this and you say, we think our pressure, talk of war and economic, brought him to the table. He's probably telling his advisors, I got a weapon, and they took all these preconditions off the table and said where, when, and how.
Right.
And
I think that's right.
That said, I want to get to another place. Iran right now. What do you think on what goes on in Syria here?
I think in Syria is very serious. Mm-hmm. I think there's a serious push by the Iranians to extend their influence in Syria, to create that bridge from Tehran all the way to Beirut. They have it. The Russians are making it possible for them to do that. And Israel is determined that they don't succeed. And they're willing to take military steps to prevent it. So this can escalate. And very rapidly. What's happened over the last 24 hours is very, very different. And it's very serious. Given what's happened with the nuclear uncertainty, things are moving in a way where who's going to be in control? Who's going to be able to tell both sides, cut it out? Interestingly, one guy. It's not Donald Trump. Vladimir Putin. He's the only one who has good relations with Netanyahu, good relations with Rouhani in Iran, and he may be the only one who can say, "Hey, guys, cut it out. Let's cut a deal. Let's figure out a way to solve this issue without shooting at each other." That's very worrisome.
Yeah. Well, let me see. Getting caught in the Syrian quagmire will look easier to get out than trying to get something worked out between Israel and Iran indirectly. Right. What got you interested in global cities as part of the Chicago Council?
Chicago. Truly. You know what? You got NATO to come here in 2012 when I was the U.S. ambassador. We did the NATO summit here. I fell in love with the city. My wife fell in love with the city. And when I came here, I said, what matters for a foreign policy junkie like me? It's not Middle East peace process, because you're not going to do that from Chicago. But thinking about the role of cities in international politics. In fact, an early conversation you and I had was about how can cities act on the global stage. Little did we know that we would have a federal government that made that very important.
Decided to walk away from the global world
and do cities, and they're interesting. They're doing stuff that national governments can't do, whether it's on climate change or integration and inclusive growth, and that's fascinating. We can learn from each other.
So I'm going to do a quick round with you on Chicago, and I want to thank you for being here, part of Chicago Stories. Since you're now a native Chicagoan, okay?
It's my hometown.
Cubs or Sox?
Cubs.
Lake or river?
River.
You can pick with that.
No, river.
I have passions for both.
Yeah.
Thick or thin pizza?
I've come to like thick pizza.
His heart is with thin pizza, is what you just said.
Yeah, I lived in Italy for 3 years. So.
All right. Sears or Hancock?
Sears.
Okay. And 16-inch or 12-inch softball, if you've ever played either one.
No, never played either one.
We'll have to get you out to a 16 inches Chicago.
All right.
12 inches for everybody else. We play 16-inch.
I'll play 16-inch.
Ivo Daalder is here from the Council of Global Affairs for Chicago. Thank you for that discussion.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
Right.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Chicago Stories with Mayor Rahm Emanuel. You can subscribe and leave a review on Apple Podcasts and tweet your guest ideas using hashtag ShyStories. Thanks for listening.